Wargame anytime. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Any Wargame Anytime. I'm Buzz, and I'm joined today by Dan and by Andy from Spymaster. How you guys doing?
Yeah, really good. Really good. Yeah, it's good to be back.
Yeah,
Good to have you. You're doing great. Yeah,
that's right.
good to have you
Andy's been
back.
on before, and he's actually agreed to come back. So we're sorry for the first time, but any other times that's all on you. How have you been since the last time we caught up?
Yeah, it's been going okay. The channel's been going all right. I think I've upped my output and it seems to have paid off. Uh, Doing okay on the old subscriber count and just keeping on plodding along, really. I think my big sort of focus for this year was to try and put out just more content more frequently, and I am sticking to that, which is positive. I know it's only still fairly early on in the year, so hopefully I'll be able to keep the momentum going.
Well,
But
building
yeah.
that momentum's kind of a hard bit, isn't it? Now that you've kind of
Mhm.
built it, it's not so hard to keep it going, hopefully.
Mhm.
How about you, Dan? How you doing?
I'm doing great, doing great. Same thing for us. We had a bit of a late start on the year, and so we're just starting to kind of get into the full swing of things. And yeah, it's I think we've all said it before, like we probably not going to be a millionaire doing this, but it's really good to just to just do a podcast and talk about wargaming. So yeah, really glad to have Andy again. You know, fool me once, that's on you. Fool me twice, shame on him. So glad he came back. We've kind of been thinking a lot. You know, Boz posted his third edition 40K lore segment, and it's really been something that I think all of us have been in wargaming for a while. So we want to sort of we did this earlier where we did sort of a lore dive, but we all sort of picked something that we like to do. But before that, we want to talk about what's continuing to be the 500-pound gorilla in the wargaming space, and that's the old world. Now, Andy, we had you on because you've been doing some really cool videos on old world, and judging from, I don't know your analytics, but I've been seeing your view counts, and they seem to be really resonating, right? Your old world content, talking about some model alternatives, talking about what you think about it. So just you can go watch those videos. We're definitely going to be, sending a link to Andy's channel. But just give us an overall. What do you think about Old World? How do you feel about it?
I've played two games of it, like only at 1,000 point level. That's all I've had time for. So I'll put my hands up playing orcs and goblins. That's all I've been exposed to. The first game was obviously getting back in the swing of things and trying to obviously learn, quite a big rule set again. And while some of it was familiar, um, I felt that retreading old ground, or what is 90% old ground, it partly wasn't that enjoyable. Um, if you'd watch my sort of like review and thoughts video, I said that you have to, for a lot of people who've moved on to say other systems where say alternate activations are present, you need to put that bias aside and take it for what it is. And by the end of the game, I was able to do that, but I did find myself getting a bit annoyed in the sort of early turns that I was playing, just because I was struggling to get back into the swing of things. It's perfectly okay. Um, I will say though that in today's day and age, to have a game which is linear in the sense that it's phases and it's I go, you go, I think that it can only ever be a middling game now. Now that there's so many alternatives on the market, um, the nostalgia factor is the strong pull. And I think if you can just take that at what it is, then it's absolutely fine as a system, but it can never be anything more than fine, in my opinion. Um,
That's interesting.
so, but that's only my perspective. I appreciate obviously, people like the I go you go and the strict phases and that, but I just think it's going to take time, more games, I hope, for me to be able to enjoy it thoroughly. Whereas at the
Yeah.
moment, it's been a staggered enjoyment.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, and I know I'm working, on my hobby side, I'm working on some dwarves, and I'm going to be playing World World. And I know, yeah, me and Sam, we've had our conversations, and me and Sam disagree on this, but I'll toss this out to get your opinion. So, there's a lot of enthusiasm for World War right now. A lot of people are getting back into it and just kind of refalling in love, right? How do you think GW is going to screw this up? So they've got a success. What are they going to do to annoy the fan base? And what are they going to do to basically screw up this game?
well, to answer that in a roundabout way, I'll touch upon your point about the analytics, and the keyword that was common across the videos that did well for me was the word alternative.
Hmm.
The fact that people are already looking at alternatives from a model's perspective means that there's hesitation potentially to be buying such old kits at such a price. And I think that pricing structure that we're seeing at the moment, whereas it's modern prices on an ancient product, I think that is what's going to be the uh, sort of the line in the sand for many people when they won't commit to it because they're hesitant to spend that money on what they would probably view as a sub-quality product by today's standards. I'm not saying that those old scoops are, poor quality at all, but obviously there's a lot nicer alternatives on the market at the moment. And I think that was probably one of the driving factors for why my alternative scoops video did so well. That being said, that will then start a vicious cycle, I think, because if the demand to buy the models in the first case isn't there, then obviously Games Workshop will think support not there, don't invest in it, and then that cycle just continues until it drops off.
Yeah.
That's my one sort of main concern with it. My second concern is obviously from a production perspective, they're spreading themselves quite thin with the amount of systems that they've got going at the moment anyway. I mean, you look at the fuss and that and the sort of annoyance with, say, the Legions Imperialis community where they can't get the products and that because their manufacturing base is down to 2 factories out of the 3 at the moment. They are having to split their resources between 5 core systems now. It's not sustainable unless they can obviously rectify that in the short term and try and get the resources there to produce the models. I think that's one element. They'll probably have to make a decision as well to see what, it might be a hard and fast decision. Well, we have the releases, and the old world releases
Yeah.
are staggered anyway. It's, they are going to be staggered and drip fed, and it might slow down even more. I think from what we've seen, let's say with Legions Imperialis as well, I'll just use that as the example. You get that immediate buzz and the drop off. I mean, I know I can only speak from a personal, within my hobby community. It was hyped for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then nobody was talking about it. And I don't think I've seen anyone take it to table.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's the trap that potentially people will fall into. There's the initial hype, and then if it doesn't find a community straight away or have a really strong foothold locally, then I think that's the big thing that will be its own demise.
Hmm.
So
I
there's a
think,
number of issues where it could fail, right?
yeah, I think there's a lot of sense in that because Games Workshop being Games Workshop, they're going to expect their players to buy their sculpts, their kits. And while 10, 20 years ago, there might not have been much other alternative choice, we now have a plethora of alternative choice. And rather than kind of respond to that by making their prices a little more competitive, yeah, I can see the wisdom in what you're saying. That's going to be the cycle of, well, we want the support, we've got the players, but they're not buying the product. And why aren't they buying the product? Well, there mustn't be support, so let's drop the game.
Yeah, I think one of
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
one of my opponents even stated that he potentially just views it as a sort of playing lip service. The whole thing is just a lip service exercise, and he fully expects it to die off within 18 months.
I
Just
think that's kind
because,
of what we've said as well.
mm,
Well, there's a lot. I mean, I know like it's really interesting because the community, like there's some strong opinions one way or another, and we're not, I would say playing a game like Kings of War, playing OPR, you're right, more modern streamlined games. I know I'm happy to play Old World for fun. I don't know if I'd want to play a tournament on it, and I don't know that I would ever go to an Old World tournament. So I think that yeah, I think you're hitting a lot of good points, and I man, I don't know. It's a tough one. I have it's such a near and dear thing, and it's something that so that's sort of and it's good to man, it's going to be an interesting year in wargaming. Um, so tell us, but before we get into, so I know for me and for Boz and yourself, we got the lore of Warhammer. I think that's the big selling point of Old World. It does have this rich lore, and I know we've all sort of got together and we want to do some lore where we just kind of talk about the lore of GW and why we just why it keeps on drawing us back. But before we get into that, let's tell us a little bit about some of the future plans for your channel. You got a lot going on. Your channel is doing great. Tell our viewers just some stuff you plan on in the near term future, what you want to do in the channel.
I think I'm going to be obviously looking at the alternatives to the old world, as I obviously my main sort of purpose with the channel is to shine a light on Games Workshop's competitors. So what I'm filming at the moment with one of my friends is the Secrets of Tixel campaign from One Page Rules. We're working our way through that. If you aren't aware of that, it's essentially their first two fully fledged fantasy armies that they designed for 3D print purposes, the Saurians and the Duchies of Vinci, and they've designed a campaign with some special heroes that they've created to basically play out 10 scenarios and have the two armies fight against each other in these scenarios. So we're working our way through that, which is really good fun, really well-written campaign. I'm going to be shining a light on some sort of indie creators as well. So I've just had an interview with two chaps from War Boss Miniatures. They're putting their game out on Kickstarter mid-March called Reliquary, which is a really unique little fantasy game that they've developed themselves and really impressive. They've only been wargaming 6 years and they've already, the one has learned how to use Blender, designed all his own models, and basically they've designed a game from the ground up in 6 years, which I think is
it looks great too.
Incredible.
I've seen those Reliquary models. They look
yeah, great. Yeah. And I'm going to be hopefully painting some of them up as well, just to have a go with them and see how they are in person. And yeah, then I'll be looking at more of the alternatives. I want to do a bit of coverage of A Song of Ice and Fire, especially with House of the Dragon Season 2 coming out sort of late spring, early summer. I think that would be quite timely. And then some of the others like Oathmark and that as well. And then probably some fantasy skirmish games as well, just to flesh it out. So quite a bit of variety I'm hoping for. I will probably do a couple of bit more coverage of the old world, just so I can give a more rounded opinion of it when I've played some more games. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell. So quite a bit really.
Sounds like a lot of great content. If you don't, we'll put the description. Go to Spymaster Gaming for his YouTube, subscribe, like his stuff. Really great content. Well, that's awesome. I know we'll be checking you out as well and continuing to follow you. So today we've done this before and we're going to do it again. So we're just going to pick some lore that we like of Games Workshop. So I'll go first and then Bozz will go and then we'll save Andy for last. Old World. So I'll start with myself. I'm an OG Warhammer guy. I come from the early editions and I like the Old World. I feel like I played dwarves and I've played them for many years, and I've looked at the dwarf rules, and one of the rules that I really felt was sort of left out was the long beards. So in the dwarfs, they have this the old world, the dwarfs, they have this rule called revered, I believe, where these longbeards, anyone within 6 inches of dwarf unit gets to re-roll their failed panic test. So it's representing them supposed to be these revered longbeards. But to me, I hate that they've changed the name of that because that wasn't what the rule used to be. The rule used to be called Old Grumblers. And what it was is these longbeards were just grumblers. They were always complaining about how the goblins or the monsters of their days were much more stronger or tougher, and that the beardlings, as they call them, were just a lot weaker. So I'm going to read this little blurb from the old Dwarf Codex about old grumblers, and to sort of reveal that, like, I worry that Old World is sort of losing some of this real flavor, because I think old grumblers, to me, it really. Oh, let me just read it. So I'll read the description on it. So it goes, Old Grumblers. Longbeards expect the worst and spend a long time grumbling about the inadequacies of dwarfs, weapons, goblins these days, as they're not as brave or they're well made or, they're not scary as they were in, the olden days. It takes a lot to unsettle a Longbeard from a good grumble. They tend to look down on the beards of the younger dwarfs. In their turn, other dwarves pay dutiful attention to the words of their elders and avoid the withering glares and the endless moans of "I told you so." Now, I know. So the rule is basically they're immune to panic, and any dwarf unit within 6 inches get to reroll failed panic tests. And like, I just think that old grumblers, to me, it fits. Like, this is the reason I play dwarves. Like, I think anyone who doesn't like this is why GW, it took the Tolkien dwarves and it just made them so much better because it has this sort of flavor in the codex of these. They're not revered, they're these grumblers, they're these people that just complain. And dwarves literally, like, they actually had a story in the codex about how there is this younger dwarf who it was his first battle and he saw this army and he was so scared. And then these Longbeards were like, "You beardling, get your shield up." And he was like, and so he literally, his fear of these old grumblers was more than fear of dying. So anyway, I thought that was just such an interesting tidbit about why I love GW dwarves better than even Tolkien dwarves. I love this sort of crankiness and this old man quality to them. It always sort of stuck with me, and I wish they would have kept the rule as old grumblers in the new old world codex for dwarves. So yeah, that's me. Any thoughts on some grumbling old dwarfs?
I think it probably has changed. It's probably been picked up by a sensitivity reader somewhere. It could have ageist connotations to it, which is probably why it's been changed. Unfortunately, I don't imagine anyone would have been offended by that term, but you can never be sure nowadays, can you? So I think that's probably why it's been changed. I mean, I remember Ash on Guerrilla Miniatures was saying about the change of the word spear chucker, and in the UK, I know potentially in the US that's got negative connotations to it. No one in the UK has ever used that as a slur, really, and it got changed to just being the standard bolt thrower again because perceived. It's an interesting one, but you're right. Is it the sacrifice of flavor? Just for obviously a bit more vanilla reading. I'm not arguing. Yeah, it's interesting change of language, but
I wonder.
I agree with you. I think old grumblers though is definitely more flavorful. So,
I wonder if this particular example isn't actually anything so deep. It might have just been they were trying to make him sound a little less comedic and a little more. I mean,
Yeah.
I know fantasy isn't grimdark, but it's kind of like they're going for this more kind of high, mighty, revered thing rather than
Yes.
these funny old grumblers. And it might have just been a taste thing rather than anything deeper. Not to lend any less credence to your possible explanation either, but.
no, I think you're absolutely right. So there's all different reasons as to why. I mean, but I don't think they're the only race that's suffered from it. Like I say, with orcs and goblins losing their trademark animosity, um, as well.
Yeah, yeah, you're
That's
right.
it's made them less funny to witness on the tabletop. Um, but who knows? The Games Workshop rule design process is a law unto itself. So.
Well, that's interesting. I never thought the ageism thing. That's an interesting point. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. But okay. Well, cool. So, Boz, how about you? What you got for us?
Well, I'm on a third edition kind of trip at the moment. That video I put out on our YouTube channel has done a lot of traffic, and I think that kind of reflects there's a lot of this nostalgia around how a lot of us got into the game. And so I wanted to kind of focus on an area of the lore specifically from that time period. And I love orcs. I love how wacky they are. I love that they're mushrooms essentially. And I love that no matter how hard GW tries to grim dark them up, they are always just hilarious. You've got a couple of orcs like, Grazkalth and the Beast or whatever. Like there are, bad dude orcs who are big and bad and nasty, but most of them are just goofballs. And especially in that third edition Orc Codex, they had some amazingly wacky rules, like the shock attack gun that could do one of 12 different things depending on what you rolled for it, and the weird boy that could do total damage or nothing at all, or send itself into a black hole, to just kind of the whole ethos behind orcism, orcishness, orky, which is basically just they're after a good scrap. They don't have much overarching philosophy behind it. They some of them like to make money, some of them like to paint things red to go fast, some of them like to use as low-tech weapons as possible. But basically, all they're looking for is a good scrap. They don't care who it's with, and if it's not with anyone else, they'll happily do it amongst themselves. And I've just really always appreciated, even in kind of more modern iterations of the additions and the orcs and how they relate to the other big players in the galaxy, I love how they've tried and kind of failed to make them any sort of serious force. Like, obviously, they're a threat. They have numbers they can overwhelm with pure numbers because they have little to no fear when they're in a mob and they don't care. But take them individually and take them kind of in the literature and the lore, and they're just kind of these wacky idiots. And I really appreciate that.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's funny you did the third edition because I'm a second edition guy. And I mean, like, orcs are like second edition, third edition orcs. Like, that was the real time whenever, like, I really think that, like, orcs and dwarfs too, GW really took the Tolkien-esque term and just made it their own and made it better. Like
Yeah.
second edition orcs and third edition orcs. Like, I remember tractor cannons in second edition.
Oh
Just like
yeah. Oh yeah.
tractor cannons, and oh my goodness, I remember second edition Weird Boys were just awesome. I mean, so yeah, it's such a and I I don't know, like, I really love that balance. I think more that they balance them very well. They're very scary and very frightening while also being just completely wacky. So I can't think about orcs except GW orcs. Yeah.
Yeah, I can never take Tolkien's orcs seriously because GW orcs got there first for me, essentially.
I think it helps where you've essentially got the stereotype of a working class Brummie as the baseline for an orc.
Absolutely.
And having worked in Birmingham for a few years and been out on a few nights out in Birmingham, I can safely say I've seen a number of real life orcs out on the streets of Birmingham after a few drinks. So yeah, not to be trifled with.
Don't come at
Apologies
us over this, Birmingham. Don't come at us.
Apologies, anyone listening from Birmingham.
And you're right, like they are truly English. Now that you say it, like they're the only one in the universe that are truly English. I mean, you just got that thick English accent. Yeah.
Mm. And I think that's what makes them more endearing as well. I mean, I think,
Oh yeah, it
you know,
was a very deliberate choice to go
yeah,
that way, and it's brilliant. You know,
I,
it's very good satire.
and you can see where people have then tried to delineate from Games Workshop's orcs. I mean, I'll give you an example, say World of Warcraft, where they've come in and they've tried to claw it back a bit and make them more noble. Um, but they still can't because they realize people don't want that. They've opted for the green skin. And then they have to roll with it because people obviously associate more with the Warhammer orc, which I find quite funny. And you're right, it is that evolution from the probably what would be described as by 40k orcs, the sneaky gits that were Tolkien's orcs, and didn't like the sun and like didn't really have a stomach for fighting. They were very cowardly. Into those who just love a fight.
The canon gets of Warcraft.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah, you're right. I haven't seen, and I love OPR for a game, but I felt their orcs to me still fall flat. Like they just, I don't. It's very difficult. Now that you say it, it's difficult to turn orcs into anything else but GW orcs.
hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting.
and I think across fantasy and across 40k, obviously, you hit so many different, obviously, themes within it. I mean, you've obviously got like savage orcs and then the normal orc boys within fantasy, which have two completely different flavors as well, but they're still united under that one banner. They still have similar elements, but they are their own thing. And obviously 40k orcs being, the mech tech version. But yeah, they will have that common thread of, savage but goofy, which is great. I think the only one that they're missing, like if someone wanted to evolve it a bit further, was to actually try a proper knight kind of orcs that try to be quite sophisticated and fail at it, which I think could be quite funny.
It's funny, I see lots and lots of models of orcs in various guises, orcs as guardsmen and orcs as like highborn lords and things like that. And they all land because it's so ludicrously hilarious to see them in any sort of other role other than just being orcs.
Did either of you two? This is going off on a bit of a tangent, so I apologize. Did either of you two play the Elder Scrolls Oblivion?
Oh my goodness, yes.
There was a quest in that I still remember, and it was like Lord Ruglump or something like that, and he was an orc who was wearing the clothes of the nobility and that, but he kept on coming out with like malapropisms. He couldn't speak the common tongue properly, and he kept on getting the words wrong, and the whole quest was just him making a buffoon of himself, and it was hilarious. He had to go and save his daughter from trolls. It was, and that has stuck to me as well, like one of the funniest quests. So, but yeah, if Games Workshop wanted to do that, obviously they've moved into Age of Sigmar, Cities of Sigmar. If they wanted to do some orcs that have started worshipping Sigmar, that could be quite funny. But I doubt they'll go down that route. But yeah.
Well, that is cool. That is cool. Yeah. And I think the other 500-pound gorilla is and I won't get off at a tangent here, but is the Henry Cavill thing. And I keep on wondering the floodgate, if they do it right, like this could be 2+ decades of GW movies and 40k and fantasy, and just opening this world up to the rest of the world. I think would hopefully be the case. Anyway, that's my hope and dream.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he has the potential to do a lot. My one hope, and I'll keep this brief, is that whatever the first project is, I hope he stays as showrunner, because he doesn't have the experience to direct and act, and I think he'll be spread too thinly to maintain a quality. And I think he'd be better suited sticking in the showrunner or exec producer chair on the first instance, and only then, once a series lands, would I hope he came in an acting role. And that's
Oh
what I'd say on it.
My one big hope around that particular issue is I really hope that they tell stories from across that entire 10,000 year period. I hope whatever happens, they don't just continuously focus on pushing the story forward, like kind of at its pointy end. I care so little about what's going on now with the story compared to having this 10,000 years of history to kind of hint at and do snippets of. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on the matter.
No, I completely agree. Completely agree. All right. Well, this is good. Andy, how about you? What great GW lore do you have for us today?
Well, I had a couple of things, and one of the things that I wanted to touch on was from third edition as well, and it was just the or around the time of third edition 40K, I would say, where we touch on the stuff that didn't really get fleshed out properly, but they're funny tidbits in the rule books that make for good sort of stimulation that you can imagine what they could be. So there's a bit in the sort of the fluff, which it's just called Other Dangerous Aliens, and there's a couple there. The Tyrellian dog soldiers and the clawed fiend of the Denorian sector. Now, while Tyrellians have been mentioned in a couple of novels, we've never seen a model on tabletop, and it makes you think about all of the other different mercenary factions that are out there. We all know the Kroot, and so like the Vespids for the Tau and that, but there's no real sort of other focus on other mercenaries, and I think that's potentially it's probably both good and bad. I mean, you don't need to have everything fleshed out in a universe. It's nice to have some mystery, but I also think there's a way there, especially seeing as they are pushing out like the kill team sort of releases at the moment, and they're bringing in like quite a lot of new factions, like bringing back the Beastmen, for example. There's potentially stuff that they could do with those sort of lesser known mercenaries that are mentioned in the old lore. So the clawed fiend of the Denorian sector, it just reminds me of like the Wampa from Star Wars that Luke cuts the arm off of. That's what it looks like. If they had something big and scary like that could be quite funny. They sort of did something similar with like the Ambles on here as well. And they did that for Necromunda. Oh no, it wasn't Necromunda. Sorry, the Blackstone Fortress. They did make Ambots for Necromunda, but there was a Blackstone Fortress expansion with the Amble. So I don't think they'd be opposed to potentially bring them in and refreshing the lore with these races. And then, so talking about Henry Cavill as well, because I think like one of the the main series that he's been obviously tipped to be involved with is like the Eisenhorn trilogy, and looking through the old Inquisitor rulebook from the early 2000s, where Eisenhorn was literally just an idea on a page at that point that then Dan Abnett then took and wrote a full novel about. A couple of his sort of entourage that never made it into the novel. So the character of like Slick Devlin, who's a bit of a gunfighter, who sort of Eisenhorn helped him out of a sticky situation. He repaid the favor by sticking with him and being in his employ, or so it says, and then you never really see him again, which is a sad, really, because that book is loaded with characters. I don't know if you've read it's got loads of good characters, that Inquisitor rulebook. It's but none of them are really touched upon or used further than the rulebook.
Well, and it's funny because like they did this in earlier editions where they would bring out these one-offs. I remember Dogs of War for Fantasy, or they would bring out their version of the Dirty Dozen, or Guardsmen. Yeah, I remember exactly.
Schaefer's Last Chances.
Schaefer's Last, yeah. And like I think what you're saying is sort of why I was thinking about what Bozz says, which is I don't care about. There seems to be a push to progress the story, but I really think that they could go wide rather than just pushing forward to just get somewhere, why don't they just go deep? Like there is so like you mentioned, like you're just mentioning these Eisenhorns and just in these older codexes, there are so much little tidbits that just are quirky, weird stuff that like I wish that they would delve deeper in that. You don't have to progress the story, right? I mean, there's so much there that I don't know. Like I agree with Boz. I don't see a reason to continue to just like it feels like it's such a fevered spot. Every every second I turn around and the story has progressed further. And I'm like, and you have to understand, I come from second edition where the story really didn't progress for years. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, I think we're not in the 41st millennium anymore. We're in the 42nd millennium. That in of itself is a bit problematic, just for the obviously the naming conventions of the whole game. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's so much, historical. I mean, to go back to Dan Abnett, he focuses on a period which is 300 years before current setting. And you don't really see them. I mean, I was looking through the old campaign books, and that's something that it's why I've really been enjoying this Secrets of Tixel from by One Page Rules, in honesty, is to have this narrative campaign like the old days where it's actually in like a proper book form, but not sort of a necessary buy. It just has a couple of fluffy army lists and it gives you a broad setting and it says go away and just have a bit of fun with it. And I think that's where they could go deeper with it. I mean, take the Sabbat Worlds, for example. They've obviously the Gaunt's Ghost series now is on, over a dozen books, and they've done the companion guide to that a couple of times, and I think they've never done a real narrative campaign to it, and they've never really done anything like that, and like focused on the time period and delved in a bit more. Yeah, it'd be good to see if they did go back and just fleshed out stuff.
Not since the Armageddon campaign. Do you remember the Armageddon campaign?
Yeah,
Way back when.
yeah,
Yeah.
And that was a really big deal as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of great material came out of that as well. Man, there's like, yeah, it's funny. You talking, Andy, has just got me going on memory lane about even the old White Dwarfs. I think were a lot better, where they would just write some article about some weird scenario, and that's what the Tixel, the Secrets of Tashal feels like, right? It feels like this. I feel like an old school White Dwarf quality to it.
Yeah. And I think we talk about the sort of like the show don't tell element. I mean, we look at where we're fleshing out every aspect of it. I mean, the classic example is the Horus Heresy, isn't it? I mean, the old sort of example being that it existed as a paragraph
Barely
in
a paragraph.
in the second edition rule book, and then they've obviously spun it into a 60+ book series, which is obviously it's a very impressive feat. But you think, is it necessary? And I think that's where we're at now, where the need to flesh out to drive. Sorry. Yeah.
No, sorry, I interrupted you. I was just going to say it was kind of cooler before I knew every intricate detail of every little battle that happened in it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned like Armageddon. Like, you think of like the old Space Marine Codex, so like a lot of chapters and nothing but like a whisper or maybe just a throwaway sentence describing what these chapters are, and then you're left to sort of come up with it in your head. I think like the old Codex would have maybe one hero from a couple of chapters, like Armageddon being the case where they actually fleshed out the Black Templars properly, and you had one hero, or sorry, two heroes. You had Halbrecht and the Emperor's a Champion, and that was it. And it was like pretty much the same, but you've got this cool guy who wields one of the black swords, and what's a black sword? It doesn't really explain what a black sword is, but it's like, okay, I get to go and imagine that and make up. Yeah, I think there's something to be said to like, less is more sometimes.
Yeah.
And you can do more with it then.
Well, even the world, like I think someone brought up Necromunda, and I think Necromunda is a great example of fleshing out just one world, Necromunda, and all the character it's sort of hitting into the Inquisition series that we focus so much on the big space marines, but really like you can go down there in just this little world and all that is happening in Necromunda, So
Yeah,
man,
I've got a book of short stories. They're really short. They're about 4 or 5 pages each, and they're all set in Necromunda. Like they're all from the Underhive, and they're brilliant. They're about characters who you've never heard of, most of whom die in the course of the book, and it just really paints a deep picture. Like I was saying, depth. It paints a really deep picture of the Underhive of Necromunda. It's brilliant.
well,
Yeah.
man. Well, we could talk forever.
Oh,
but
I've got one more thing. One more thing.
Oh no, go ahead.
Andy, that a page where they've got the Tyrellian dog soldiers and the big Yeti looking thing. Do you happen to remember the other alien that they've got listed there that isn't a Harad?
Yeah,
It's called an unknown.
it looks like a jellyfish.
Well, no, the other one. It's an unknown soldier of some sort,
Oh,
and it looks really big and scary.
yeah. To be honest, it's it's a Necron because
It's a Necron.
They hadn't even designed the Necrons.
No,
at that
that's
point.
right. They kind of just looked. They looked even less Terminator-y than when they actually came out. It was just kind of this squat, wide-stanced robot thing with a big gun.
Yeah,
And I remember
And from the
seeing
looks of
that
it,
and
the-
going,
the
"Oh,
first
this
bit-
looks cool."
yeah. The first metal models, by the looks of it, were taken directly from that concept
Yeah.
art as well.
Oh,
They
yeah.
didn't change. Yeah. Um, yeah.
That was all.
Man,
I just want to point that out because foreshadowing and everything.
Oh no, no, like we could, and I wish we could stay here and just talk for hours, but obviously, we have to do other things other than war game. But Andy, thank you so much for coming on again. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to Spymaster Gaming, go to YouTube, subscribe. He does a lot of really great work, and really great to have him back on again. Andy, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. Thanks.
Bozz, any last word before we go?
Yeah, for sure. So, as well as the podcast that we post on Spotify, we're also over on YouTube. You can find us on YouTube at any war game, anytime. If you're liking what you're hearing, go and give us a like and a sub. Every sub helps. And yeah, until next time, as Sam says, go where the game is good.
Thanks, guys.
Any war game, anytime. Going where the game is good.